Uh, First, I'm Jerich Beason, and I am the CISO for the Commercial Bank in Capital One. I have most recently got another role. I am now the CISO of our software business. We have commercialized software that we developed internally. So when I was first asked to do this keynote, I was excited. I wanted to jump right in. This is a topic that is so near and dear to me. In many ways, it's personal. I've written blogs on the subject. I've written LinkedIn posts. I've sat on panels, much like the ones you guys saw today. I've also made it part of my SANS leadership series, SANS Seat at the Table, where we talk about leadership topics. And we brought a world-renowned expert on neurodiversity who gives TED Talks and speeches all over the world. She helps organizations build their neurodiversity programs, even in the FANG industries, which we're familiar with from a tech perspective. And we paired her with a Fortune 500 autistic CISO. And we had a powerful conversation. If you haven't had an opportunity to listen to it, I suggest you go check it out. It's on YouTube. But needless to say, this is something that I've talked about in the past, but I wanted to take a different approach today. First, I figured out that I'm the last person that you guys are gonna see. So you've probably heard a lot about what neurodiversity is at this point. You've learned a lot about the characteristics and the traits. You've heard about ample accommodations. So I needed to give you something a little bit different, and that was gonna require me to be a little bit more personal. It's gonna require a little bit more vulnerability on my part. And just the thought of that gives me a pit in the stomach, kind of that feeling when you miss a meeting that you thought you had an hour later and you figure out you missed it. That's the feeling I have right now on this stage, but I'm gonna go for it. So my son was diagnosed with dyslexia and ADHD 18 months ago. It wasn't a surprise to us. We have multiple people in our family that have neurodivergent conditions. But when you're different, the world really isn't kind to you. And he's a twin, so it was really clear for us to see the differences between him and his brother. Like I said, the world isn't kind, your friends aren't kind, classmates aren't kind, teachers aren't kind because people just don't understand. And if I'm honest, I wasn't as kind as I was supposed to be either. I just didn't have the patience and I didn't understand. But even through all of this, it was clear that there was something else going on. There was a little bit more. It wasn't just the fact that he had ADHD and dyslexia. So we went and we had him evaluated. And it turns out he's also autistic. So now I'm with a son that has 3 conditions that individually would make him neurodivergent, and he has the trifecta. So me and my wife, we dove right in. We started doing the research. We listened to the podcast. We watched last year's Neurodiversity Summit. We looked on YouTube and watched other videos. We read the books. We got him a psychologist, a psychiatrist. We talked to neurologists. We got therapists. I've heard that word used a lot here. Recommend therapy for sure. It's probably one of the biggest things that we did. And we really just wanted to understand what he was going through and try to see the world through his eyes a little bit. Also, figure out how we could best support him. And in the process of learning about this and getting more immersed in the topic, it became pretty clear that the world at large doesn't understand this. And because of that, they placed ideologies and limitations on him as soon as he got the labels. So why am I sharing this? I'm sharing this because as I learned more about neurodiversity, it became pretty clear looking into the workforce that these same ideologies and limitations are being placed on our workforce today. And also when I looked into this, it became pretty clear to me that the characteristics and traits that neurodivergent people have in many ways are a perfect fit for what we need in the cybersecurity industry. But this is a highly untapped talent pool. This is a talent pool that's so misunderstood, and oftentimes they're the weird people. They're the people that are crazy. They're just misunderstood because of the way they think. And if I really am honest, cybersecurity is probably the most equipped field for neurodivergent workers. So I'm going to use some terminology here, and I want to make sure we level set up front. Neurotypical and neurodivergent. We've heard the terms used throughout this entire summit, but some of you may be tuning in just for this, so I want to make sure that we're all on the same page. The word that is often used for neurotypical is normal. I hate that. That is not the way to look at it. They are only part of the majority. Their thought patterns and their behaviors align with the majority of people, thus making their cognitive approach typical, neurotypical. And then we have neurodivergent. Neurodivergent people have cognitive and behavior patterns that are atypical or different. It is cognitive differences. More specifically, it is cognitive differences, not cognitive deficiencies. So, how do these cognitive differences manifest themselves? ADHD, Tourette's, dyslexia, autism, bipolar. There are a number of other known and unknown conditions that make someone neurodivergent. But one of the things that people simply think about when they hear about these neurodivergent people is they're going to live a hard life. They're going to have challenges that neurotypical people don't face. They're going to start every race against a neurotypical 5 paces behind. And the reality is, in many cases, that's true. They're going to be misunderstood, and they're going to have to seek to be understood. They're going to have to overcome challenges that neurotypical people don't face. They're going to have to try harder to catch up in a race just to stay in the race. They're going to have to find ways to accommodate themselves because the world simply won't accommodate them. They're going to have to find a way to extract the value out of their differences instead of being limited by their differences. But they work among us. They're doing it silently. So the reality is, this is a character of a person that I want on my team. So let's talk a little bit about some of the benefits of being neurodiverse. Now, to be clear, when you meet one neurodivergent person, you meet one neurodivergent person. They are not all the same. We just talked about a number of different conditions. Each one manifests itself in different ways. Some people are going to have all of these traits that I talk about. Some people are going to have none of them. Some people will have one of them. You will also notice that when I pull up these traits, these are some of the same traits that neurotypical people have as well. One of the main differences is with neurodivergent people, these challenges are more pronounced. And the powerful traits, I call them superpowers, they're usually to a higher degree in your neurodivergent population. So the first one is attention to detail. Once again, this does not apply to every neurodivergent person. So if you see yourself and you say, that is not me, I bet you some of these other ones are. When it comes to attention to detail in cybersecurity, it's imperative. We have to be accurate, we have to be right. We have to identify deviations from patterns. The attention to detail that a lot of our neurodivergent workforce provides helps them with this specifically. Another one is ability to focus. Now, you talk to a neurodivergent person and they're going to say, I have a hard time focusing. That is true in most cases, unless you like what you're doing. When neurodivergent people like what they're doing, there's a level of tunnel vision that they have, and they can become deeply immersed in whatever it is they're doing. They can look up and realize they haven't eaten for 8 hours. And they can work time after time on that one thing until they reach the end state that they're after. Another one is neurodivergent people have a structure in their life that they live by, and it makes them very systematic. And I don't know about you, but I have a lot of people that I've worked with on my teams and peers that don't necessarily follow the procedures. They don't follow the rules. They don't align with what they're being asked to do. Your neurodivergent workforce, it's all about, what do the rules say? What am I supposed to do? and I'm gonna follow that to a T. If you have bad procedures, you're gonna find out pretty quickly if you have a neurodivergent workforce, because they're gonna follow those bad procedures all the way into the wrong direction. Neurodivergent people also have an attention to nuance. Now, what I mean by that is in cybersecurity, we are often baselining normal so that we can identify the anomalies and deviations from normal. We use machine learning, artificial intelligence for that. That is just how the brain of many neurodivergent people is programmed. It is programmed to seek out that small difference. And when you're in a field where we're asked to find the silver needle in a pile of gray needles, that is an exceptional skill set. Problem solving. When they have an abstract way of thinking, they're going to bring in a completely different approach to the same problems that a neurotypical group of people may bring. Now, we need the neurotypical approach, but sometimes we don't get the answer that we need. And when you bring that abstract mind with the neurotypical mind, you have a well-rounded, very formidable problem-solving team. Technical proficiency. If you survey the neurodivergent workforce in your cyber team, they're most likely the more technical people. They can be in GRC, they can be in audit, they can be in these other areas, but studies have shown, my own eyes have seen, that our neurodivergent workers are more technical. And that goes back to their attention to detail, their ability to focus. They dove in on those technologies. They dove in on what they're trying to learn, and they became experts in it. And then lastly, their strong work ethic. This is one I rarely ever hear discussed. But our neurodivergent population, they weren't given a chance on many occasions. Our neurodivergent population, they know that this may be the only chance they get when they get one. They want to do a good job. Additionally, they're systematic. They're following the rules. They're going to do what they're told to do. Let me give you an example. A few weeks ago, I approached a neurodivergent worker, self-diagnosed. I mean, he's diagnosed, he self-proclaimed it, so we already knew. And I was trying to approach her from a mental health perspective. And I said, hey man, like, how often do you just take a break and scroll social media, during the workday just to clear your mind a little bit? And he looked at me puzzled. I don't understand what you're talking about. I was like, well, yeah, like how, every once in a while, I don't know about you, but I mean, I pull up Facebook or Instagram or Twitter and I just scroll just to clear my mind. He said, well, the policies of our organization are that we're not to use work computers to do personal work. And I'm like, okay, take a step back. How about on your personal phone? Do you pick up your personal phone and do those things? He said, I'm here to work. I come in from 8 and I work until 5, and then I can go home and do my personal things. He said, are you telling me that it's okay for me to do this? And then I realized, okay, I know enough about neurodivergence and that I don't want to program your mind in that way. All right, so I backed off the conversation. But this is what you're going to get at your neurodivergent population. Things are very black and white in many cases. So these are things very specific to cyber, but there are also some characteristics that apply to any industry, including cyber. And one of them is they tell it like it is. And when I tell you they tell it like it is, there are plenty of neurodivergent people that they don't understand all the fluff. They don't understand the politics. They don't understand beating around the bush. They're going to tell you exactly what they're thinking and how they're thinking it. There's a line from a movie, and I'm going to age myself here, where Tom Cruise says, you can't handle the truth. Don't ask your known neurodivergent population how well you're doing unless you're ready to really hear the truth. Don't ask them what is working and what isn't working unless you're really ready to hear the truth. But the reality is we need to hear the truth. Our teams aren't always telling us because there's a level of fear. Oftentimes, emotion is removed from the equation with our neurodivergent population, and it is pure logic. This is what I see, this is what I say. I'm not thinking anything else about it. And that's something that you need. And in reverse, they want that same thing. They want that feedback directly. They don't like, so we use, a lot of us use this sandwich approach where you get some good news, some bad news, and you end it with good news. Well, that's what neurotypical people need because emotion comes into it. We want to feel like, okay, well, they said something good at the end, so things are going okay. Neurodivergent people oftentimes are confused by that. Like, so what are you telling me? I'm doing good? I'm not doing good? Like, what do you want me to do with this information? Because you've confused me by fusing all of this together. And we'll talk a little bit about that more a little bit later. And then the last thing is they bring a unique perspective. Now, I've talked about this, up until now, of course, but I posit that diversity in general, not just neurodiversity, it's not about looking into a room and seeing a spectrum of colors. It's not about seeing different religions and cultures represented. It's not about seeing different sexes and ages represented. It's about the cognitive diversity that comes with those things. That in itself is cosmetic. It's the cognitive diversity from those lived experiences, those different cultures, those different backgrounds that make for conversations and directions of thoughts coming from over here and over here and over here and all over the place. If you put 25-year-old white men in a room that are neurodivergent, you're gonna get 25 different opinions. It doesn't matter about any of those other characteristics, because at the core of it, it's in the name. Their brains think differently. And what we're really after is cognitive diversity, because that's what results in collaboration. That's what results in problem solving and innovation and taking things beyond where we've ever seen them. I want to repeat one more time, not all neurodivergent people are the same. A lot of these characteristics are applicable to everybody. And there's a spectrum, right? So one person may be really strong in this characteristic and a level 10, while another person may be a level 1. One person may have 4 of these, one person may have 7. But ultimately, these are the characteristics and traits that are commonly associated with our neurodivergent population. So we've talked a little bit about the characteristics. We've talked a little bit about some of the challenges. Now let's dive into what we actually need to do to accommodate this group. First and foremost, is flexibility. Flexibility in their workspaces, flexibility in their schedules, flexibility in how they do their work. COVID and the pandemic allowed neurodivergent people to work from home, in many cases for the first time. I've talked to a number of people and they said they were never more optimized than when they were at home, because they could control their environment. They can get rid of the sounds that were distracting. They can get rid of the noise that were distracting. People weren't stopping by and trying to touch them and shake their hands. They were able to just do their job. They need that same thing now that we are in the coming back to the office and going back to the new normal, as people are referring to it. Clear communications. Neurodivergent people, in many cases, they want you to be direct with them. I struggle with this. I love to use metaphors, analogies, and similes. Quite frankly, as a security executive, that's the only way I can convey to non-technical people. So that's just how I have built my communication style. But when you're talking to some neurodivergent people, using all of that, it's confusing and it's frustrating. And they're trying to just get to the point. I heard someone say it earlier today, bottom line up front. What are you trying to tell me? Let's get on with this so I can get back to work and so that I can stop trying so hard to hear what you're trying to tell me. Also, combine written and verbal communication. So I talked earlier about the focus level that neurodivergent people have in their work ethic and how they really want to just succeed. When you're giving them direction, they're locked in. They're laser focused and they're trying to hear everything that you're trying to say. It's hard for them to take notes and do that. It's hard for anyone to do that and take notes. It's even harder when there's an more intense level of focus. Another one that we've heard a lot about is sensory-friendly environments. I won't belabor this one because you guys have heard a lot about it, but noise canceling headphones, just something as simple as giving them a quiet space to work when they do have to come into the office. If you have a neurodivergent worker, you want them to be the best version of themselves. And the way that they can be the best version of themselves is for you to put them in a position for them to feel comfortable and for them to feel like they can be that person. And then lastly, diversity inclusion and belonging, DIB, what most people are familiar with it as, or DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. It has taken off the last few years, but neurodiversity is commonly omitted from this diversity conversation. So I haven't shared this yet, but most scientists, most studies have shown that at least 30% of our population is believed to be neurodivergent. 30%, 1 in 3 people. And somehow that group is not included when we're talking about diversity. Your workers, your coworkers, your team, the people that are working beside these people, they don't know how to identify if someone is potentially neurodivergent. They don't know how to work with them. They don't know that they are constantly ridiculing them and insulting them because they're making these jokes. The other day, something small, but I said, I'm having PTSD from WannaCry. We had these horrible PTSD from Log4j. And a neurodivergent person told me, he's like, hey man, you know about this. Like, how could you play with the term like PTSD when you know what it means to me? Right? The average person uses these terms in regular vernacular and they don't think anything of it. But as you learn about this, as you become more aware, you can actually do the things that show that you care. So another thing that is not often talked about, neurodiversity is a generational issue. Every generation can be classified as neurodivergent. I guarantee you there were baby boomers that were neurodivergent, Gen X, all the way up to millennial and Gen Z. But the main difference is it wasn't really being diagnosed until the millennial generation. Millennials are making up almost half of the workforce. And millennials were diagnosed when they were in grade school. Gen Z was absolutely diagnosed in grade school. So these people know that they are neurodivergent. They know that they need these accommodations. And in many cases, they were given some of these accommodations, especially our Gen Z population. You hired that straight A student straight out of college, interviewed well, and you think they're gonna kill it. But you don't realize is they had accommodations the entire time. So then you bring them into your organization and they're struggling. They're not thriving. They're not what you expected of them. It's because you haven't given them the same level of comfort that they've had the entire time. This is your incoming workforce. These are the people that are working besides you. It is imperative that neurodiversity is incorporated into all of the future conversations on diversity, especially inclusion. They need to feel included. You can't have people feeling like an outcast. So there's one characteristic I did not talk about. That's loyalty. Loyalty precedes retention. If you want to have a loyal neurodivergent workforce, you have to think about the things that matter to them. It's not uncommon for neurodivergent people to be made fun of. It's not uncommon for them to be ridiculed. It's not uncommon for them to feel like the outcast, the odd man out. But what's really hard is when the performance reviews tell them to be more like a neurotypical person. It's not helpful, it's insulting. They'll say things like learn to multitask, knowing that neurodivergent people are tunnel focused on one thing and they're gonna do that one thing better than anybody else, but maybe they can't do 10 things at the same time like everybody else. They'll tell them to make more eye contact, knowing that is really difficult for a lot of neurodivergent people. They'll say things like, get on the camera on Zoom. That makes people uncomfortable. Or be more social. In fact, it's pretty well known that cybersecurity people are really antisocial. There have been jokes about, sliding the pizza under the door and just letting them do their job. It's more recent that we've talked about soft skills in cybersecurity. And we still need the soft skills. And I'm And I'm well documented about talking about the soft skills, but there's definitely a heavy need for technical skills as well. So how do we change that conversation? We need to give realistic feedback. If a paraplegic with one leg was not making it to meetings across the building in time because there was a back-to-back meeting, you would never criticize them and say, how did you not make it half a mile to the other side of the campus in 5 minutes like everybody else? You wouldn't do it. In fact, you would probably try to accommodate them. You would maybe add some white space in their calendar. You would maybe say on the second half of back-to-backs, they can be virtual. Or you just wouldn't schedule back-to-backs at all with them. I don't think that people are intentionally cruel. I think people just don't understand. But with our neurodivergent population, that's pretty much what's happening. We're taking their disability and saying, don't have it. Mainly because it's a hidden disability. It's one that people don't know about. Another important thing is you gotta honor boundaries. I've talked to some neurodivergent people, and one lady told me that when you shake my hand, I physically get sick. Like, don't shake my hand, right? And she said, and if you hug me, I might attack you. I'm just letting you know now, I need my personal space. I respect it. I respect it, I understand it, I know it. If you want to retain your neurodivergent workforce, you need to make them feel welcomed. And they don't want to feel tolerated. They want to feel celebrated for their strengths. And they want you to try to accommodate their differences. We do that in all cases. It's just a little bit more pronounced in our neurodivergent workforce. So I started this saying that I was going to be a little bit more personal, that I was going to be a little bit more vulnerable. And as we did the research and we started to try to understand, what's going on with my son, we learned that in many cases, neurodivergent conditions are hereditary. My brother had a neurodivergent condition, my son has it. And from encouragement from my wife, I went and got tested myself. Turns out I have ADHD. Also turns out my wife knew this for a long time. And she has been putting accommodations in my life unknowingly so that her life wouldn't be as difficult as it would be if she didn't. If you don't know me, if you do know me, let me be an example. There are people walking among you. There are people that are working with you, that are dealing with this. Many of them don't know. But what's even worse are the ones that do know. And out of the fear that they have, that pit in my stomach that I had when I was gonna come up here, and knowing that I was gonna share this, I was flown in to talk about neurodiversity. Like I said, I talked about it and I am an ally for it. And I try to make people that are neurodivergent feel comfortable, but I myself had a little bit of fear before I went to share this information. How do you think the rest of the workforce feels? All humans have strengths, all humans have weaknesses. To be human is to err. Nobody is perfect. Let today be the day that you decide that you're gonna try to make everyone feel welcome, especially your neurodivergent workforce. Thank you.